Hey, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. I don't know why that felt strange for me today. I think I'm in I had a weird vertigo morning where I feel it's kind of like I'm in another branch of reality.
Is
Because I
that because
wrote
you
this
wrote a 10,000 word chapter?
well, it was 8,000 words, but it was
A
something about
chapter?
it. Yeah,
Yes.
because it was just, and it was
Are you
like,
Russian?
no, I mean, a lot happens and it's kind of like, I guess you wouldn't know this, David. Sean, you would. There's that scene, that series in colonization, where we have two parties and they keep kind of getting closer and closer, and they're
Oh
like,
yeah, yeah.
and it takes a really long time because it's the climax of the book, if I remember right. And this is like, it's like
That
a
has one
mid.
of my favorite reveals of anything we've written. That.
Oh, you'll have to tell me what that is later because I don't remember. But the it's kind of like that because I had several parties and it was a little mini thing in the middle of the book, like it was a mini climax. It was a midpoint, and but it was just something about it just like fried my head. So I've been kind of surreal the rest of the. I was going to write something after, and I was like, I cannot do that. I cannot. I'm done.
You
I feel that
cannot.
way sometimes when I watch a really either good or depressing movie. Like I walk out or I finish watching it if it's on DVD and I just
Then you wipe the Kleenex off of you. And
but for a few hours after I'm not myself.
Well,
quit
that's the way I
partying
felt after I
yourself.
read. That's the way I felt after I watched Jojo Rabbit. Actually, this was different though. This was like, and the funny thing is, I didn't. It wasn't like a crazy long. I didn't write the whole chapter today. I wrote like half of it. So really, it was, I don't know, 4,500, 5,000 words, something like that. Which for me is, a lot, but not crazy. But it was just like they were such intense words, and I couldn't do any more.
Johnny left a note for himself yesterday on the draft that said, "No more than 500 words to finish this up." And then how many was it?
Well, it was another 4,000. So I overestimated by a factor of almost 10. It was pretty bad.
Awesome.
I mean, it's a really, really good sequence. It's just like basically what it is it's a 6 episode serial. It's a season of 6 episodes. And I said, it just has to have a 7th episode. It's just going to be a weird oddball because I can't fit it all in. So
Yeah, I think that's a little bit like length of Sopranos started doing that. I think they were the first show I ever saw that was like, well, that episode is 57 minutes. That one's 39.
well, and that's why when we start writing some of these serials and we'll do some of that analysis after and be like, well, chapter 3 only has 12,000 words and chapter 7 has 20,000. It's like, well, kind of who cares? Like
Right.
that was the length of the episode.
Yeah, and it's like I actually haven't seen the finale of Good Place yet. I've just seen the first 3 seasons. But the 4th season, that's what I understand. Like they ended it, but there was just an extra episode. Like it didn't match all the rest of the seasons. It was just like, well, we need 2 episodes to tell this last bit of the story. And I think
Dexter should have done that after season 4.
yes, they should have. I will say I'm really proud to say that Haley just straight up took my advice on Dexter and stopped at the finale of the 4th. And she just pretends that like there's no 5, 6, 7, or 8, which is the way everybody should watch that show.
So I realized that I never actually said what the show was about because I just got distracted by this weird, alternate reality that I've been feeling all day. But we're going to talk about building worlds, like collaborative world building, or I suppose it would apply to just non-collaborative world building. But before that, that'll be my something cool that I did a really long chapter because that took a lot of time. But do you guys have anything?
I know Dave does. What's Dave's something cool is also one of my something cools. What is it, Dave?
Well, I have 2 then if you're counting that. Well, I finished my book.
Yay!
You guys have such an abundance of something cools that you can save them because for me, I'm like, hold on, I came up with something there. I found there was a clover that was like, might have been a 4-leafer. I better save this moment.
In a
I
pile
live
of
life
shit.
to the fullest, man.
There's that, and also I just I watched Into the Spider-Verse again.
Oh, that's so good.
Oh my! The scene where he's falling from the building, you know the scene?
Yeah.
It's just so fucking perfect and beautiful. I was actually looking to see if there was like a poster for that scene. There is not. There's not one that's wide angle.
Mm-mm.
There's one of like a vertical portrait. I was like, that is so lame. That deserves a full wide angle treatment right behind me on my wall. I just love it so much.
And then whenever you're on the podcast,
office.
you just go like this and it looks like you're falling too.
Well, it's such a good moment because it if you listen to This Is a Beautiful Thing about DVDs, which isn't something you get with Netflix or anything else, you listen to the commentary and they're talking about how the scene was like he's falling, but at the same time he's rising, and the way they shot it just demonstrated it so perfectly.
Yeah, they're two of the most interesting filmmakers out right now. Like, I'm just automatically interested when I hear their names attached to anything. And I don't know, there's something, I just love that project because it was like, okay, well, clearly Sony shit the bed with several Spider-Man movies in a row. And they're like, okay, Marvel, just like go do something awesome. And then they kind of like did justice anyway with Venom, which I didn't see. I know Johnny saw it. I didn't see it.
I saw it.
Did you like it?
It was okay.
Yeah, it seemed okay, but
I didn't have a problem with it because I enjoyed it on the same level that I enjoy any superhero movie I might see, which is a superficial level. Like I'm not interested in superheroes, so I'm like, did it have a lot of explosions and stuff? Okay, cool.
Yeah, but Into the Spider-Verse is like so much better than that.
Yeah, I saw it. I wasn't as in love with it as you guys are. I thought it was good.
Yeah, I mean, both of us grew up reading Spider-Man, though. I think that has something to do with it, too.
Well, sure, but I didn't, so therefore mine is valid for me. Don't talk me out of it.
Your opinion is wrong.
Yeah, anyway, I loved it. Okay, so my something cool is something I'm curious if either one of you have seen this. Have either one of you seen a show called Happy?
I've never even heard of it.
Oh, is that with the dude from Law and Order? And he's got like that imaginary thing.
Yes.
I haven't seen it. It's on my to be watched.
Okay.
I remember when it came out though, and I was like, I don't know if this is gonna last. I don't know if I want to watch it.
It has 2 seasons. Haley and I have been watching it, and we just finished the first season. And we've got
Chris Maloney, I think it's the guy's name.
Yes, it is. We've got two responses. Bonnie says yes in all caps with an exclamation mark. Dan says I started it but bailed. And then Bonnie says, I'm so surprised you haven't seen it, Dave. It's so up your alley. Oh my God, Dave, it is. It is so up your alley. You will totally like it. I mean, I cannot imagine the amount of drugs that were involved in the making of this show. The way Haley and I put it yesterday while watching the finale is there was a lot of acid in the production stage and coke in the drafting stage, clearly.
Was there heroin at any point?
Probably.
Okay, I'm in.
There is so much going on. It's the most graphic novel-y, comic-y, booky thing I've ever seen on television. It is, I'm not even saying it's good necessarily. It's just manic and crazy. And the violence is like Tarantino level comedic and giddy, but like all grounded in this very consistent tone. I think the writing and the execution is better than the actors, except for the lead, who is fantastic. And Patton Oswalt is the imaginary unicorn, which is also perfect. There's a Bryan Cranston light, like clearly he was trying to do a Walter White, Heisenberg thing. But overall, I think you'll really dig it, Dave. The reason, Johnny, that you might be interested in this is because so I'm allowed to talk about Fat Vampire, right? In those terms. Okay, so Fat Vampire. No. Fat Vampire was it's being produced by NBC Universal for the Sci-Fi Network, and that never felt like a super great fit to me. It felt like, okay, that's awesome, but after seeing Happy, oh my God, I could totally see how that's a great fit for Fat Vampire. It's comedic horror. Like there's definite horror elements.
I feel like Happy was on USA or something.
No, it said it was a sci-fi production.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, it's sci-fi. The logo comes up. We watched it on Netflix, but Netflix seemed to think I would like something deranged like that, and they served it right up to me. Turns out I did. But it just makes me feel really good about the Fat Vampire placement, because the amount of blood, like there's so much blood, but it's kind of whimsical in a way. Even at its most violent, it has a sense of humor, which is kind of perfect for Fat Vampire. So anyway, that's my something cool. If you like really obnoxiously violent material, there you go.
Wow, that's pretty cool. All right, so World building, building worlds together. I mean, the nature of world building is that you're creating an epic, like huge thing to some degree, like some degree of hugeness. And so that's like this topic, like where do you begin talking about world building? I think, Sean, you function as point on most of our world building, at least so far. Well, although Dave, you do a lot of that too, right? Don't you do a lot of that when you guys are working together, figuring out the worlds and stuff? So how do you guys do that?
Well, Dave finds stuff in the outline a lot. So our typical process is that we'll just talk about something and we'll decide on like macro level world stuff together. And usually that's like, wouldn't it be cool if? So anytime you can end a sentence with the after if, wouldn't it be cool if all of a sudden everyone disappeared in the world and there were only a few people left and one of them was a serial killer and one of them was a secret agent who's an unreliable narrator, right? So like those big elements, and we'll talk about, well, what does that mean? But then on a granular level, Dave does that in the draft. So it's kind of similar as far as our results, Johnny, to the way you and I do it, where it'll come, here's some big ideas in the outline, and then you find a lot of the story in the draft. But it's a different approach because
well you're kind of conflating two things here that I think that I conflate by default if I don't think about it, and I think a lot of writers probably do conflate, and that's world and story. So Dead City is the example that we've given before. Dead City was originally my idea, and my idea was, wouldn't it be cool if there was a world where there had been a zombie plague, but it's not, they could be basically stopped wherever they were in their decay and their progress by a drug. And I had all sorts of world elements, these police-like entities called clarifiers that are in charge of determining whether somebody's too far gone or not, because, past a certain point, they go feral and all this stuff. And so I presented that, and Sean said, oh, he's nodding along. Oh, that sounds pretty cool. Okay. And then there was like this pause. He goes, well, what's the story? And I didn't have a story. I just had a world. So when you were talking a second ago, you were talking about Dave discovering like story elements and stuff like that. So how do you manage those when you guys are beginning a project?
Well, in the world stuff, yesterday's gone, we kind of built together and brainstormed together. For Nevermore in Available Darkness were more things that I plotted out ahead of time. Like I drew maps and shit.
Both of those were like, for Nevermore and Available Darkness, I mean, were both ideas that David had forever too. Like Available Darkness went back to high school, and for Nevermore probably went back like close to that long.
And Dave, what did those initial like ideas look like in your head? So for instance, for Nevermore, was it there is a world where, or multiple worlds, or was it there is a girl who, or were those two together? Like I'm trying to separate world and the actual story in itself that takes place in the world.
I'd say it began more like I'd been influenced obviously by The Talisman. I love that story.
Which is a 2-world story.
Yeah, Stephen King and Richard Bachman. And I wanted to do something about a girl that is in a miserable existence, and she kind of jumps from one world to another. So initially that was the idea that spawned everything, but then I was like, okay, well, what do I want the world to be?
Wait, I remember you originally pitching this to me, and you pitched it to me with a very specific scene, and it's a scene that I didn't even make it into the first book, I don't think. I might be remembering that wrong, although we did eventually come to the scene. But it's the scene where the house is burning, and he has saved her, but she doesn't remember him, and basically the house is burning, she's gonna die. He brings her out, he saves her from burning up, and then she somehow wakes up and realizes that she's known this guy forever. And that was like a scene that you pitched as basically, I've always pictured this scene. I don't really know where it goes, or there's a lot of stuff to add to it, but I've dreamed of this scene, was basically how I remember you bringing For Nevermore up.
Okay. Yeah, I don't even remember that. Interesting. Okay.
I mean, I find that I will add elements to a world as I go if I'm working with a story or some degree of world building ahead of time. But it's only under certain circumstances that I think that extra world elements come up. So I'm trying to think of the way to articulate this. I know that I've had stories where they don't have a specific setting. We've talked about this a little bit. And so I just
And
don't
that's always a
mention.
mistake.
Well, I just don't mention setting, and sometimes I get away with it, and sometimes I don't. So the first few Fat Vampire books didn't have a setting. I mean, I may have said that they were
I
in.
think they're Columbus, aren't
They
they?
are in Columbus because I went to college there, and it was a city I felt I knew. But I don't know that I mention that in the first book, and if I do, I mention it as very much a by the way. Those books could take place anywhere, and I think by default I tend to write that way. So, but then there are other books like Dead City where it was like I had a kickstart, and then I know the Skin District was all sort of my on the fly, the idea of this zombie ghetto, and some of the things about like the wires that they string to keep people from falling in the streets, and there were some of those elements that I think I did.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that in Dead City specifically, there were like world building ideas, and then you got really specific with them. So like the idea of having big giant buttons on the computer, right? So we were talking about how it's a really necrotic friendly city, and you know a lot of people with necrotics in their family move there, and so the businesses have to support that, and the culture has to support that. So you added things like a couple of playgrounds, which were amazing. Or, you know, you would have someone, you know, one of my favorites Dead City scenes is actually, it's no big deal, but it's so
Is it the fun zone?
No, it's although it might be outside of the fun zone, actually. It's when Bridget is spying on Ian, and she's in the car, and she's like, you know, checking on her phone to see where he goes. And there's like a little necrotic girl who like comes and like tries to say hello
That's
to
at the
her.
fun zone.
Okay, yeah. And then the dad comes over and he has his Windex and he's just wiping her like grime off the window. And the fact that he would have that Windex handy, I thought was just such a beautiful detail.
Yeah, I think he tells the daughter, go get your kit. Like, you know, something like that. Like they carry a kit, like a first aid kit.
Yeah.
But I think that, I don't know, I guess I'm trying to figure out the interplay of those because I don't generally dynamically create a world as I go. I imagine some people do, but it was like.
But what you do is understand the world. And then once you understand it, you add a lot to it.
Well, I remember having that discussion about, I think you gave like Dell as the example where is Dell located?
Just outside Austin.
Oh, okay. Well, then that can't be it because there was something where it was like the city was the city was kind of built to support the needs of a major industry that was in that town. So
there's a lot like that. Volkswagens like that. The town where Volkswagens are made are just like, it's all Volkswagen.
It's all Volkswagen's employees. So I know that we had that discussion. We talked about some aspects of it. And then I think that when I get into it, then it was like, okay, well, they're driving down the street. What are they seeing? Because I already knew the Skin District existed, which is what we called our zombie ghetto. Interesting. Okay. Is that different from the way how do you guys approach it?
I don't think we're that mechanical about it. Like I've never given Dave, or no, I probably have given Dave like packages with world shit, but he'll just ignore it and like he'll take a few things that he likes.
I'm Christopher motherfucking Columbus. I need to explore that world.
Right. But it does that. I never take that personally because as long as there are seeds there that, you know, help him to, you know, that germinate into different ideas, that's fine. But
there was a story that there's a story that you wanted to do with me, and I don't know who you're doing it with now or if it was done even.
Who's thinking sex right now? Pause. Something I want to do with you. Do you still want to do it with me? Because I got it all.
Remember that time Dave was like, "Is anybody else thinking what I'm thinking right now?"
And it was like a naked Frenchman wrapped in a burrito or something really interesting.
It involved a kind of firefighter is all I'll say. Anyway, the story, the package you did, I liked more than the story you did. I was like, I want to tell that story, like all the background and origin stuff. So.
Oh yeah, no, I know which one you mean. That's actually that's a classic, and there is one version of that story in existence.
Who wrote it?
Stacy wrote it, and it's,
okay.
If this is the world I'm thinking of, I remember being really excited about it too.
Yeah, and you still can write it, dude. Or actually, that's a really good example. That's the kind of world package that I could do that for you all day long. I did do that for you, and then you're like, so I gave it to Johnny, right? But if I just make you a world package and then you come up with the actual story, I would do that all day long. I think, see, Johnny wants the world to understand, but then the basic story to write to, right? Where I think that's where I lose you, is if I build a world and then also try to give you a story.
Too many fences. I like.
Yeah.
I like. I am very like all the comedy that I do. Like when I do comic strips or I write anything humorous or I make a fake blog about somebody. It's
Have you
all
really
be
done
that
that
about?
before?
no. So it's always inspired by something in real life.
How often is that inspiration? My mom.
Not my comic.
Sean inspired our current story too.
My erotic art, my paintings hidden behind a Patreon wall. Anyway,
How much is your Patreon?
$69.
Good answer.
Anyway, so like I'm inspired by like real life stuff. I like some fences. I like to have a world to play in, but not have all the rules laid out for me, because then it just becomes too much in my head. And I'm thinking, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. So if you can like show me to this nice little garden and say, okay, do whatever the fuck you want there, be God, then I'll go crazy.
Oh, well, I would like to try that then. And I'd also add that that'll be a really fun way to approach the project that we have coming up with Joel, because that's like, I mean, that is one of his superpowers, is just coming up with really cool.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to brainstorming that. And I think Joel's perfect partner for that.
It's interesting that you guys say that, because that approach would not work for me. It's too many. Like I think the way that, because I'm trying to think about this now, like how do I do this? And I'm trying to think of, there's a scene, Dead City is a really good world example for this. So this is also Dead City, where she's at her house and she's watching some footage and it's kind of an eerie atmosphere. And then somebody knocks at the door and it's her necrotic neighbor, basically a half zombie neighbor, if you remember that scene, Sean.
Oh yeah,
and
it's a great scene.
There was a lot of world building that followed that I don't believe was in the beats. I don't believe was in a world package. And it was about the different ways that the different drugs affect people and what this particular zombie could do and couldn't do, like what she was still able to do. And I know that there's something, because I'm listening back to this now, and there was something in that scene about like vector animals, like she was bitten by a dog that had contracted this, and it was a different incubation period when it was through an animal. But that stuff that came up, like of the necessity of the mood rather than the world, if that makes any sense. Like I knew I wanted this it's almost a cinematic feel, like she's in a dark room. I can just imagine like one light source and it's just kind of eerie. And I wanted that knock on the door that happens when you're just startled, right? And it made sense that it would be something non-threatening, so I made it her neighbor. And then the world details came out of just the necessity of putting those two characters together, because there's a handler too who can speak normally, which is very different from what you were describing.
Yeah, I think that Dead City is some of our best world building for sure. And I think it's because we were really harmonized during the writing of that also. And it was kind of our process at its best, where I spent a lot of time on the world package. I knew the world package was awesome. The beats weren't, too specific. They had a lot of intent behind them. Like, hey, here's the kinds of things we want to talk about. Here's what this scene and that scene and the other scene need to do. But there was so much flexibility, and you understood the world and you agreed with the world. And so it made it really easy to kind of manifest new and exciting things about the world and examples like, hey, we want to do this. And you would find just really creative ways to make it believable. That's the thing. I think one of your superpowers is to make a world believable. So I think that's one of your superpowers.
Well, I can't write in a world that I don't believe.
Okay,
that's why I wouldn't write a superhero story other than like Batman or something.
Right. That's what I was going to say. It's both kryptonite and superpower, because if you don't believe the world, fuck it if it's going to come off, right? Like that's just, I
wouldn't call that kryptonite though. I would call that superpower number 2 to write a shitty world.
Well, it's a non-starter, right? It's like there's been projects where we're like, okay, how can we monetize quickly, right? And I'm the same way. Like if I don't believe it, I can't write it either. But I think
same with when we tried writing romances. Like, sorry,
yes.
I don't believe this. Like, why is this guy a 20-something billionaire with abs of steel?
Well, that's what I mean. I think it becomes kryptonite if you keep trying at it and then you fail, right? Like we're not selling the books that we need to because we're not we're not hitting the material in the right way. And it would be the same thing as if we look, superheroes are super commercial. We're going to write a superhero series because that's where the money is. But you don't believe that, so there's no way we're pulling that off unless we try to rewrite Batman.
Well, this is a total side tangent, but actually, in the spirit of what we're just talking about, I think that it's probably really important for some people to hear. I know it's the sort of thing that if I had heard it at a certain time, it would have affected me in a good way. Is the necessity of being yourself. I think that we do tend to try and be the people that we admire. Like Dave, you've talked about trying to write like Clive Barker or something, and it's just, you ultimately are who you are. And I love that the Hank Ketchum quote about how, I found my voice the day I stopped trying to be Van Morrison. And I think that we do try to be the Van Morrisons that we admire. And it's like, no, this is who I am as a writer, and that's my voice, and it is what it is.
Yeah, Bonnie's done a really great job in the last year plus that we've been working together, where she's trying to really home in on what it is that makes my writing so that she can groom the outlines for that. And it's not like, because I have spent a lot of time as a ghostwriter, so I do kind of, or even if I'm not ghostwriting, I'm producing something or I'm trying to be invisible there. So I do lose a little bit of sight about what my most natural style is. And she's been really good about, bringing that to the surface so that I can write just more fluidly, because like you said, Johnny, if you can figure out how to be yourself on the page, 100% of the time, then it's not that writing's ever going to be easy, because writing is an emotionally draining experience, but it could certainly be, you get a lot more for the time that you put in.
Well, I think that it comes from believing that there's a right and a wrong way to write. And there is, to some degree, right? Like there are things that you can definitely do wrong. There is bad writing. There is such a thing as bad writing out there. But so much of it is just taste. And it's like, I remember hearing once too, that like Americans trying to speak another language, that an American accent is really just mispronouncing words. If you say French or Spanish or German words and you say them wrong, well, that's an American accent. And when we hear an American accent, or when we hear an accent like in American, we hear Irish or Australian or British, we're like, oh, that's pleasing to the ear. Well, they're mispronouncing our words, but we like it.
Yeah, but they do it so much sexier than we do.
Right. I mean, that's what writing voice is. I'm not being Stephen King successfully. That's because I'm not Stephen King. I'm doing Johnny Druin very well.
Well said.
Okay, so back to world building. So, I mean, it's supposed to be collaborative world building. Is there any special considerations there? We've defaulted to collaborative because.
Well, I think everything is collaborative at this point,
with us.
With us, right. I don't think there's anybody or any projects I can think of either that have come out in the last year or that we have coming out in the next year, or any of the rather substantial bank that we've built up. We've got a lot of books that, we're still kind of plotting out exactly the right way to handle them. And everything's collaborative. And I think, we really leaned into this with everything. So the way we do it now is somebody will have an idea, and the idea can be anything. I mean, it could be as simple as a title. Like one of the series that we have going on right now was born title first. It was actually a title that I've been trying to get Dave to write to for about 3, maybe 4 years now. And it just never happened. And then someone else in the company was like, I'll do it. And then so we all got together and are like, okay, here's the title. Here's kind of the energy we would want the series to have. Let's start brainstorming ideas. And, we all have very different skills within the studio, but
particular skill set.
As far as world building, Joel is exceptional at coming up with those elements. So probably as far as like big idea, I'm pretty good at that. I can bring a big idea into the studio and say, what about this? What if this was the premise? And then as far as like world elements and how they work, Joel's always like, okay, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. But then, Bonnie will chime in and she'll want to know, well, okay, that world sounds really cool, but why do I care? Like, what does it matter? How does it affect the characters? And, how would people live within that world? And all of a sudden, then we have a real discussion going on where everybody is like chiming in with their ideas and questions.
If I could just pause really quick, because you just skimmed over something that you took as obvious, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily know is obvious. If you create a wonderful, like crazy, weird fantasy world with all sorts of interesting bells and whistles, and then you basically have normal people doing normal things in it, it's stupid. Like, don't do that. So what Sean just said about how would the world affect the characters and the characters affect the world, like, make sure you have that interplay. It shouldn't really require stating, but sometimes people, it's like, well, why was this? I'm trying to think. There are movies that I've seen where I'm like, okay, but why did they show me all that other stuff when it didn't even come into play?
Yeah, because the world should be a character. I mean, you really should think of it in that way. We absolutely treat the world as a character. It has, and I think a mistake too is to treat the world as this brand new thing that everybody is just enamored with. So cell phones are the best example. Our smartphones are really magical, right? They have more technology in our pocket than they used to get the space shuttle up. Like, that's just amazing. But we don't talk about how amazing that is. Like, when's the last time you talked to somebody about, oh my God, can you
imagine writing a scene where Sean gets together with Dave and discusses the new features of his iPhone?
Right. Like, that's just, maybe that happens.
Let me explain to you how it works and where the carrier signal goes.
Right. Like, you could see, after Apple does one of their keynotes, there's, Apple aficionados will talk about it and Apple haters will talk about it, but it's not like they're really talking about the magic or the details of what happens. Or, another example that you always hear is, you don't want to hear about how the hydraulics work on a door that just opens and closes with a whiz. It's really about, people should take technology for granted in whatever your world is. They're not impressed with it because it's every day. So if you're coming up with some big giant world thing, like Dream Engine was one of the first big worlds that we built. And we built that very fast on our first version and very publicly. And, but it still had some really big ideas. And it was all about how do we make this believable? And some of the ways that we made Dream Engine believable was in the language that we used. There was a consistency, but nobody was like, oh my God, we can manifest stuff. So the premise of the Dream Engine is that there is this engine in this world called Altera, and there's like an underclass of people who are having dreams and nightmares, and they're manifesting that into real things up top. But nobody is, I mean, that's pretty magical. You could dream things into existence, but nobody is sitting around the dinner table talking about how, how magical things are over at the Ministry of Manifestation. It's just everyday business.
But there are some chapters in there I wish I could take a hack at again, because the narrator does describe a good amount of that stuff. But I tried to do things like, the car, instead of a car, they call them conveyances. And there's like a lever that they pull instead of a wheel, because it's like a steampunk world. So the sorts of things, like, I actually think the best thing you can do to a really cool world is undersell it. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
So like, the more impressive and amazing your world is, the harder it's going to be to resist having, doing long scenes where they glory at the wonder of your world. But I think the best thing you can do is just like, they're going about their business and they pull something out of their pocket and do something. You just mention it. Nobody knows what the fuck it does. You just get, well, I guess that can do something. I love to mention things that I never follow up on as long as they aren't vital. Just because it's like, it makes you go, oh, well, but I guess I wouldn't know everything about that world now, would I, if I was eavesdropping on it?
Yeah, that show, Altered Carbon, does that really well, where there's just so much technology and it's so amazing, and it really is just kind of taken for granted by all the people in the world. They maybe will pontificate about it if it's important to the plot in some way. So, for example, the stacks that allow you to live forever, obviously that's something that's kind of revered as science, but only because it's a stand-in for immortality, which we all find fascinating, right? That's why vampires are fascinating, in part, is because it's the promise of immortality.
But even when you have those stacks and stuff, like, I mean, I don't remember the series that well, but I think the right way when you need to explain something like that is you need to put them in a situation where it would be natural. And sometimes it's not easy to get into those situations. But like, a bunch of people sitting around the dinner table saying, well, let me tell you about how my stack works. That wouldn't make any sense. But if they're investigating a crime that occurs at a place where these things are like refilled or whatever it is they do, and they're like, well, we think the murder happened this way. And they say, no, let me explain to you why that can't happen. Then the cop or whoever is learning something they didn't already know, and so is the viewer.
Well,
I think that's the right.
Yeah, I want to say, I may be wrong about this, but I think the way they introduced stacks in the pilot
is because they said that the Pringles shouldn't be the only chip.
That's exactly how it happened. No, it was a Catholic church thing where they needed to bring up a witness, but they couldn't do it because she was Catholic, and so she needed a true death. And so that kind of, just by nature of, oh, we can't bring this.
That was the cop and her mom, right?
Yeah, you can't re-sleeve the witness. And that's kind of interesting. Like, so all of a sudden they've introduced a philosophical dilemma also with the reality of the way that the stacks work. So you have something that's thematic playing in concert with the actual technology.
And well, yeah, I was going to say it's an instance of what you were talking about before, where the world sort of dictates, how these people would behave differently. I think a good way to do the whole when you need to introduce or explain something, you do the whole fish out of water thing. So like it's somebody new to the world or new to the specific job or whatever.
Yeah, that's another
exposition.
One. Major hats off to Johnny on that too. I think the introduction to the world of Dead City was great, because he had one of our main characters.
That's my favorite opening sequence. I was just listening to that again. I really love that.
It's really good.
I like that too. I did read that.
Oh, right.
They have that was the wedding scene for Dead City. He did get there.
No, I read a bit of it. I liked it. I think I read about half of it, and then I got distracted by whatever we were working on. So,
well, it's very effective. So you have this journalist, and the part of the world building is that in Yosemite, they've kind of blocked off Yosemite, and that's where they ship all the people who are past their inflection point, who are going to turn. They're going to rage at some point. They're going to
the medication can't cure them anymore. They're too far gone.
So they're shipped off to Yosemite, and then when they rage, they're allowed to be hunted. And so the journalist, Alice, is she's there to do a story. So she has to, by nature, she can't even be like, yeah, shut up, I know all this stuff. There's a procedure. It's militant. She needs to, no, you're going to shut up and you're going to hear our little lecture. And so even though she wants to say, I got it, I know, she has to sit there and listen to it, and so does the reader. And that's great, because one chapter in, and all kinds of shit.
I also kept it moving too, and I think I feel like that's important, because if you haven't read Dead City, the way that Sean's describing it, it would be easy to feel like they put her in a room and they show her a film and it's a chapter of exposition.
No, it's like a conveyance of like things.
Right, she's shuttled from one person to the other. They're super short chapters. Like she goes in, and I know there's just a little tidbit that I really enjoyed where she needs to be wearing body armor the whole time. Like these people in Yosemite wear body armor all the time because they're, and so like the guy asks her what her bra size is, because they finally started putting boob indents into jackets. So, that sort of thing, like she's being fitted, she's being asked about, what size are you for this like bite resistant fabric that they make the sleeves out of and stuff like that. And so you get a bunch of things just rapid fire. So then she's shuttled to an MP who has been bitten and is necrotic herself, which means that she has this disease, but it's stopped. They've stopped it with the medication. And so since she's being shuttled, then that person, like you get to learn a little bit about, okay, she's still functional even though she was bitten. There are necrotics, basically offshooting necrotics, like that's a thing. It introduces a bunch of little elements rapid fire. So that sort of thing. I like what Dave said about fish out of water too. That's what we've done in the past as well. There's somebody who just doesn't get any of it.
Yeah, and going back to the collaborative part, I think you want to work with people who bring something different than you do, right? So Dave has this sounds like a joke, but I'm actually serious. Dave's contribution is often, how do I make this worse? You know, like we have a situation, we have a world. What would make people in that world more miserable?
I'm the opposite of a wedding planner.
Yes. You know, if the, like, there's a lot of times I'll think of an idea for, this could be a world element, and then Dave will go, ooh, ooh, ooh. And then he'll say, what if, but all the babies
somebody dies on Christmas.
Right.
Okay, it's a baby.
Right. There's always a way to make the world a little more miserable. You know, Johnny, you're definitely like, how do I make it more believable? Right? How do I anchor something even ridiculous and make it seem like, yes, that could totally happen. And it doesn't matter who your cast of collaborators are, you're going to have different skill sets. And what you don't ever want to do is bring ego into the world building process, where you're like counting ideas, or you're trying to compete with who has the best ideas, because it's not a matter of better or best, it's a matter of differentiation. You want different textures to your ideas, which is why I think that our studio work has been elevated, you know, in the last couple of years, because we have so many ideas being added to the pot. Nothing ever is just as is. So like the book I'm writing now was originally a premise that we all came up with kind of together. You know, we had a purpose for it. Okay, this is for this pen name, and we kind of want it to do this job, and this is how we're going to sell it. And then Stacy was the most qualified person in the studio to come up with a 1.0 version of that draft. So she did very quickly, and it was perfect for that 1.0 draft. And then Bonnie and I took that story and added a lot of world to it, added a lot of story, added a lot of character and all the things it needed. And then that's what I'm writing right now. But it had, on the 0 point version, it had input from anyone who was on the story meeting during the couple of days that we brainstormed. And then, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 really hands-on, but also, you know, a lot of other voices. So even though there will only ultimately be one name of a person who doesn't even exist on the book when it's, you know, eventually at market, it had a lot of voices. And I think that there's so much value in collaborative world building, because you get different perspectives and you get different voices, and texture makes stories better.
That's interesting to hear you say that, because I was actually just thinking, I love everyone in the studio. I don't work collaboratively with everyone in the studio. The way that you guys work collaboratively is actually overwhelming for me. So I can work with one person. I can work with Sean. But what I find is, and I guess this would be like just maybe my personal perspective, and then maybe a thought on managing some of this, is I guess the first one is know thyself. And I have learned that whenever I've opened up to more voices, I feel to some, and I've talked about this before, I feel to some degree beholden to them. So if Joel makes a great suggestion, even if I know I can take it or leave it, I will feel like, okay, it exists. It's like a jury being told to disregard evidence. Well, I still heard it, motherfucker. So, you know, it's a little like that. Like, I can't disregard everything. And then the actual practical suggestion would be that, you know, when a writer's room is functioning, like for a TV show, there's a showrunner who's sort of directing traffic, and somebody's in charge of that episode. Somebody's the lead writer on that episode. And so somebody is ultimately making the decisions, this goes or this stays. And it's not truly just a like free for all and, okay, now make something from this soup. So I think that if I were to be in that situation again, where I had everybody popcorning for me specifically, I would just need to really know, like, just remind myself that it's all just kind of up for grabs, and that ultimately I'm in charge of what ends up on the page, and that you can take or leave what comes.
Yeah, I think for you definitely need a filter. I think if we're all like gathering ideas for a project that you and I are going to do together, you know, I need to take those ideas, trim them down, and then give you something complete. And I think our last big project, the one we talked about a couple of weeks ago, you know, the big one, I think that showed us that more than anything. You know, like, simple is better with you, because, so, like we talked about, you know, at the top of the hour, you know, you had an 8,000 word chapter, right?
I need room for my own ideas. They're going to come anyway.
Right. And 4,000 words of that chapter were from a single beat. Is that right?
8,000 words of that chapter were from a single beat.
Okay, well, wow. Like,
It's an escape. They're at a location and they need to basically coordinate an escape. And there were a lot of pieces to that.
yeah, so I think that because you have so many ideas, I need to pull back. I need to basically give
Well,
you
your beat, just
setups.
for example, and I don't want to read the specific beat because I don't want to blow anything, but it's like your beat says, let me see if I can actually find it. It's super short. Yeah, here, it's literally one line. Sabotage on blank, klaxons blaring, escape pods hatching, chaos. That's the beat. And that took
Right. See,
8,000 words.
yeah, but see,
That's the outline for 1917, isn't it?
Right,
I,
right.
I know you well enough as a collaborator and as a partner at this point that I know that's going to work for you. And you know what? Here's the thing. We made the same mistake in the last couple of years, Johnny, specifically you and I. We made the same mistake in the last couple of years that we didn't learn from with romance, right? Where so when we were writing erotica, and we had a pretty solid erotica line when Lexi was writing with us, and then we thought, you know what, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make it about story. Right? But now erotica, the difference between erotica and romance is that erotica is sex first, story second, and romance is story first, sex second. And we were trying to
You got your pizza in my porn.
yeah, pretty much. So we decided that we knew better. We were going to put story first, and so we basically eroded all of our buyers because they're like, dude, why is there so much story here? that's
It's getting in the way of all this masturbation.
Need some more gangbusters action.
Yes, that was literally what our readers were asking for. We weren't delivering. We deserved to lose that audience. And I think the same thing happened when we started getting all these other great collaborators, and especially Bonnie, who was giving us these great story jackets and could really flesh out these outlines. Then like you're saying, Johnny, you felt beholden. I felt the same way. I'm like, we have this talent pool. I should really be using them to elevate our outlines. But it didn't elevate our outlines in that specific case because it became overwhelming. It became too much. And so my attention should be put in another place, which is on world and on characters and on basically giving you setups that you can deliver the punchline.
Well, it's interesting because we have these big meetings and everybody really loves them. And Dave's not usually at them. I usually attend them, but I very seldom put my own work in there. Like I very seldom want help popcorning something because it isn't the way that I work. So it's almost like I know that this family is here, but I'm kind of over here. And that's kind of how I want it, right? Like I work with you, or on a few projects I work by myself, and I think I'm just a little more of a loner. And I think
I almost feel like there's a lot of projects that are in our horizon that I want to map out for us. Again, for me and Johnny, I'm talking about here. I almost think it would be better for if I know I'm going to outline or I want to popcorn, I want to get the collective ideas. It's almost better if you're not on that meeting, even though it's your project.
It is better because whatever you select is still coming from you. You're the one doing the popcorning. You're the one doing the preliminary research. And I know that I can take or leave anything you give me too, but at least I have fewer inputs.
Right. I think that's exactly it. It's fewer inputs. So the bottom line on collaborative world building is
fewer inputs was the name of your last erotic story, wasn't it?
It was.
It was, and that's why I didn't sell.
You want you definitely want to kind of, you have to know what's best for you, which I know is a recurring theme in everything that we talk about. There is no right way to world build. For Dave is a very different world builder and collaborator than Johnny, and the same could be true for anybody in the studio. But all of us collaborate with someone on some level, and
even if it's just a spouse kicking ideas off, or readers that particularly like your work, who I liked that, he didn't like that. That's a collaboration kind of.
Yes, and I think that if you are trying to, accelerate your storytelling, evolve your storytelling, become a more fluid storyteller by telling stories that you're good at telling, and you want to make that a repeatable process, then, and you don't want to sound like you're repeating yourself, which that's definitely one of Dave's kryptonites that he's become more aware of is, we joke about how many characters named Stan there have been, which is funny, but it's more like the same professions over and over. It's that kind of stuff. But when you collaborate with other people, I know I've helped him a lot in that particular way, just more texture to the stories, more voices, more personalities. And that is something that collaboration gives you in world building is more of that perspective.
That's what's so hard about art. If I were starting right now and I didn't know what I was doing, I would research the hell out of I would watch YouTube videos. I would read biographies of famous writers. I would read style guides. But ultimately what you need to do is get away from all of that once you kind of know it and make your own decisions. And that's something nobody can teach you.
Exactly.
On a side note, I've decided I want to write existential erotica.
I like that.
I really like that. I'm really turned on, but does it matter?
Dave, you never watched Adventure Time, did you?
No, I want to actually.
You should watch the new show, and I'm curious what you think about it. Pendleton Ward has a follow-up show. It just dropped on Netflix Monday, and it's called Midnight Gospel.
Okay. I will check it out.
It's nutty.
We're basically at the top of the hour. Do you want to do just a speed round, 60 seconds each, how you keep track of details?
Oh, yeah. So
maybe it's not a speed round question.
Well, okay, forever we had a holy grail that we were working on that didn't work out, that fell through, and we've been looking for a system for a while, and we just started actually. I just built something in Notion, which is the app that we were talking about a little while ago. And in the last draft that I passed to Bonnie, as I was going through it, I just tagged stuff, put this in Notion, put this in Notion, put this in Notion. And this is actually the first time I'm talking about this out loud. But once it's done or we have enough, I'll just share that with everyone in the studio and then people can add to it. So it's like, how we have our coffee shops and, our stuff that's just kind of standard, cities and social media and things like that. So it'll all go in there and then everyone can access it. And I think we're going to kind of build some template-y type situation to be able to keep everything in Notion, which seems like a nice solution for now.
I'm a half-ass tracker. I literally just keep a running note at the bottom of whatever chapter I'm working on. And just if somebody wants to participate in my world and learn world building, I'm just very selfish about it. I'm like, well, they can read the fucking book. So I don't write it down. But that's not the best solution, but it does work for me.
I use a different thing in Scrivener, or I'll also, if that becomes overwhelming, I have the Bear app. I like that, the Bear Notes app.
Ooh.
You would have a Bear app.
What was the Bear thing that came up recently? I remember a Bear thing.
It's a good app on Mac and iPad. So, and I use that to keep track of important. I always forget names and little details. So.
You forget friends' 40th birthdays like that? Is that what you mean?
Fuck off.
All right. Well, we'll tie it up, but I am a little disappointed that I remember there was a bear thing that was really funny that Sean was crying, laughing about involving Dave and a bear, or saying that the bear was like Dave. Can't remember.
Oh, I would really like to know more about this.
I feel like it was a studio thing. I feel like it was in a meeting and you were talking about a bear something or other. I don't remember. But whatever. If anyone out in their world has figured it out, you let me know somehow. All right. So thanks for everybody for listening to the Story Studio podcast. And we'll see you next time, guys.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.